You are listening to Fast Track Podcast, the place to be to fast track your personal finance or fast track your business, or both, through a series of conversations with those who have learned it, done it, and made it. Before starting the episode, I have very exciting news to share with you. I am collaborating with financial Imagineer Ladislas Maurice to launch the Fast Track Money course. This 6-week online course is designed to help young professionals in their 20s to early 40s to learn how to save more, earn more, and invest, using money as a tool to fulfill your dreams. We teach you the proven method that Matthias has been using himself in the last 20 years and achieved financial independence. So sign up today on fasttrack.live/money course to transform your relationship with money from today. Today my guest is Ladislas Maurice. He's a full-time traveler and investor with a particular focus on emerging and frontier markets. He travels around the world looking for unique investment and immigration opportunities. He has traveled to almost 100 countries and lives in a dozen. And today I'm going to ask him about his wandering investor lifestyle and real estate investment in emerging markets. Welcome to Fast Track Podcast, Ladislas.
Thank you.
I'm very interested that I saw a lot of your YouTube videos and it's very informational and you tell people what's possible, in countries they would never imagine they would think about investing, or they would never imagine thinking about going there. For example, right now you're in Ukraine. So you have very interesting experience and personal background. So why not tell us a little bit about who you are, why you're doing what you're doing now?
So I went to college in Canada, then grad school in Australia, started working for Nestle. So I did the whole corporate thing for a number of years. I worked in Africa for 7 years for Nestle. So my last role there was being in charge of a dairy business for a few West African countries. And then when I hit 30, I decided that I wanted to do something else. So before looking for my next career options, I went on a big road trip with my parents, actually. So it's pretty cool. We drove from Oman in the Middle East to Paris in France. So going through all of Iran, Armenia, Georgia, all of Turkey, Eastern Europe, etc. And along the way, I just saw so many opportunities because for the first time in many years, I wasn't working 60 hours a week, and I could actually spend time looking at opportunities and not have to worry about, whatever my boss wanted, etc. So I got involved in some deals, and then the more I got involved in deals, the more I pushed back looking for a job. And then it actually became a full-time occupation of mine to manage my own money. So now I travel full-time, mostly in emerging and frontier markets, and I make investments in these far-flung countries.
Do you invest your own money into it, or you also help, for example, you talk about Ukraine, real estate here, and then probably there were some other people interested in, would you help them do that as well?
Obviously, I don't give any investment advice, and my main role is managing my own money. But I'm always open to discussing with people. And then when people follow me on my YouTube channel or on my mailing list, I talk about the opportunities that I see on the ground.
Yeah,
but they're typically higher risk propositions, if I can put it this way. So it's not something that people should just rush into. When I talk about real estate in Turkey, for example, the country is going through a currency crisis. So people need to have a higher tolerance for uncertainty and risk.
Yeah, that's very, very good point. Previously, I interviewed Alex from the Main Street Finance. He also talked about, everyone should, based on their personal financial situation, and then decide what to invest, not just to listen to the others blindly. And you talk about real estate in Turkey, and I saw your YouTube videos. You also talk about real estate in Montenegro, real estate in Ukraine. And why are you interested in real estate?
Look, I don't do just real estate, so I invest in a few asset classes. So obviously, I have a bunch of stocks. I make private placements directly with companies. I help startups as well. So recently, I invested in a chicken and egg distribution business in the Gambia. So my portfolio is quite wide. But what I like about real estate for a part of my portfolio is that it offers me a real asset. So it's actually something that, that I have a stake in, I can touch, I can feel, I really own it. So that's one aspect that I like. I feel that it's the safer part of my portfolio rather than stocks. You never know what can happen with those. But generally with real estate, you own it. If you have if you have insurance with it, your risk is quite low. And it offers as well, especially in some emerging and frontier markets, it gives you more options in life. So, for example, if you buy for $250,000 of real estate in Turkey, you can get citizenship for essentially free for yourself and your family. So just by buying two undervalued apartments really in Istanbul, so which is a beautiful city of 15 million people, and you can get apartments there for $1,000 a square meter in the center. So by any measure, it's not expensive. And on top of this, you then get a Turkish citizenship for yourself, for your wife, your husband, and then all of your children that will then pass down the generations. So by making that investment that I just need to hold for 3 years, in 3 years, I can then sell the real estate. I am giving the gift of Turkish citizenship to all of my descendants for generations to go if the laws stay as they are in terms of citizenship in Turkey. So I find this amazing. I find this to be a really, really interesting offer. So compare that with just buying a random condo in some small town in Germany. Your great grandchildren are not going to remember that you bought that condo, but that Turkish citizenship will go down the generations. And then in some other countries, you don't get citizenship when you buy, but you get residency. So places like in the Balkans, most countries in the Balkans, so Montenegro, for example, beautiful country, just by buying real estate in Montenegro, you have the right to move to Montenegro and live in Montenegro. So let's say that you work online or you manage your investments, you can work from anywhere in the world. Why stay in a high tax Western country when you can move to a beautiful country like Montenegro, 600,000 people, stunning national parks, beautiful beaches, warm water, history, just beautiful little country with very low taxes of between 9 and 15%. So you get to make an investment that is, one, interesting, and that, two, is lifestyle, and three, that can help you reduce your overall tax burden and live in a lower cost environment as well. Yeah. So it's a lot of benefits that you don't necessarily get when you buy normal real estate in Western countries. But then again, it comes with an issue in the sense that you need to have cash to invest in these emerging markets. Access to credit is, one, complicated, two, often non-existent, and three, when you do have access to credit, it's very expensive and not worth taking. So it's not like getting a 30-year mortgage and paying 1% like in Germany. Like, you're just not going to get that. So it's really more for people that have already a fair amount of investable assets.
Yeah, I remember once I was interviewing Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist, and he talked about Plan B. And what you talk about here, I think it would be very interesting for people already have the cash on hand. Then they're looking for global mobility or more choices or lifestyle change. But for those who do not have this cash on hand, maybe at the beginning is to accumulate wealth, and then you can look for more options. And what would you think are the, besides the benefits, what are the risks associated to have a real estate property in different countries or even in emerging markets?
Cool. So that's a very good question because there is definitely a number of risks, and they're quite different from the risks that you face in Western countries. So typically the risks that you face in Western countries is credit cycles. So if interest rates rise, then you generally see housing markets being quite volatile. Two, often kicking out tenants in Western countries is very complicated. If someone stops paying and they have a family and I don't know, or it's a single parent with 3 kids and you're trying to kick them out, it's going to take months, if not years in some cases. And then there's the risk of government regulation. So that's a very real risk in Western Europe in particular, where governments just like coming up with all these different regulations and norms, saying, for example, that, oh, your house needs to be green. If the isolation, if the house is considered to be bad in terms of energy, you need to do all of these renovations, et cetera. So it can be very, very onerous to carry real estate in Western countries. The set of risks in emerging markets is different. Often the biggest risk is currency. So investing in a country where the currency just plummets, which is, for example, in Turkey, people who invested in Turkey in 2012, when the lira was at, I don't know, like 2 liras to the dollar, and now the lira is at like 14 liras to the dollar, that's an issue. So what we see now in Turkey is that prices really have bottomed and now they're just kind of indexed to the dollar, but still currency is an issue in these countries. And also liquidity. And that's one that is often not understood by Western investors. People need to understand that in many of these emerging markets, selling can take a while. So it's not like selling a house in Austin, which will take a day, or in Germany, 2-3 weeks. In Montenegro, it's pretty common to have to wait 6 months, a year and a half to be able to sell your house or your apartment. Same thing in Ukraine. It can take at least a few months. In Africa, it can take a few years. So liquidity is a risk that is often underappreciated by Western investors in emerging markets. So when you invest in these countries, you need to understand that it might take a while for you to get your money back once you sell. So you need to really take this into account when you make that investment, and which is also risky if you're taking a loan in Europe for 3 years, et cetera, that you have to pay back, and you're hoping to do a flip in these countries with that money. That's definitely a risk.
Right. Then it's really suitable for, okay, again, not financial advice. Hello. So then it's really suitable for people who have literally extra cash on hand. They're not like relying on the cash to feed the family. And then maybe it's they have high risk tolerance because they already have their stable income, stable assets somewhere else safe. And then, okay, how would you evaluate which property to buy? What are the numbers you're looking at? What are the factors you take into consideration?
Look, real estate is real estate at the end of the day. Is how much yield are you getting for the money that you're investing, and what do you expect the capital appreciation to be in your own home currency? So you also need to factor in potential currency depreciation of the country you're investing in. So just yield and potential capital gains.
What would be the yield in, let's say, Ukraine and the emerging markets? Because I know in Switzerland, you cannot find something more than 5 or 4%.
Yeah, even if you get 5% in Switzerland, you're doing very well. So it depends. People often have a misconception that all emerging markets have higher yields because the risk is higher. And it's not necessarily the case, because in many of these markets, for example, in Africa, yields are typically quite low, actually, because there is nothing else to invest in. When you save your money in these countries, all people do is just buy real estate, because there is a local stock market, but people don't generally do this. Often getting money out of the country is an issue, so they can't invest overseas easily. And they don't necessarily trust their banks either, because a lot of these countries have a have a history of bank runs, of banking issues. So people just pile into real estate. So often yields can be quite low in some countries. So I think then your question would be, which markets currently offer interesting yields in terms of emerging markets? So I'm in Ukraine right now, and Ukraine has the highest rental yields probably in the world on a cash basis. So you can get into Kiev, for example, the capital of Ukraine, and you can buy apartments, historical apartments in the city center, and make rental yields of between, if you're going with smaller amounts to invest, maybe 7% gross. But if you start investing bigger sums, like at least $250,000, $300,000, you can get 12, 13% gross. And that's nearly impossible to get in Western Europe. In Turkey, for example, yields are quite low because the currency depreciates faster than your rents in local currency get reevaluated. So there, it's about more the Airbnb game. Yeah.
And would they also have capital gain, like appreciation over the years?
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. So for example, in Ukraine, prices dropped approximately 75% from peak, and only in the last 2 years started going up again by 5-10% a year in the last 3 years or so. But Ukraine saw, two revolutions, multiple bouts of currency devaluation, hundreds of thousands, actually millions of people immigrate to Western Europe, saw everything that could go bad, just went bad, and war, et cetera, et cetera. So the market just reached a bottom, and now you just get very interesting deals, good potential for capital appreciation and high yields. But then it comes with, Ukraine risk. I mean, it's all over the news. So it comes with that sort of risk, but the reality is people are making these yields.
Mm-hmm. So besides real estate in those frontier markets that you're interested in earlier, you mentioned as part of your portfolio. What are the other kinds of investment you
So typically the way I approach it is I look at the macro story of the country. So am I interested in the country from a macro point of view? If I am, I typically go there, I fly there, and then I stay there for at least a few weeks, sometimes even longer, to get a feel for the opportunities on the ground. Because some countries have interesting macro, but few investment opportunities. Or you go somewhere, for example, Uzbekistan. I went there, I think like two years ago or so. I was very interested in the reforms happening in the country. And so I took a flight, I went to Tashkent, I stayed in the country for a month. My idea was initially to just buy an apartment in the city center because they were quite cheap, about $1,000 a square meter for a city that is going to boom over the next coming decades, really, and has been booming. But buying there as a foreigner was full of ambiguity. So technically you're not allowed to, but if you create a local company and you buy through that local company, it's possible, but it's a bit of a gray zone. And then I looked at the local stock market. So there is a stock market in Uzbekistan, and I saw some incredibly cheap companies that were growing 20, 30% a year, that had no debt on their balance sheets, and that were paying dividends of 15, 20%. And I thought, I looked at this and I was like, wow, this looks like less work than managing real estate from abroad, and very attractive. So instead of buying an apartment, I bought a bunch of local stocks, cement companies, just basic businesses. So cement companies, local banks, what else? A steel making company, a commodities exchange, an oil and gas services company, just all of these random stocks. And it did incredibly well. Up, I don't know, 2.5, 3x in 2 years. And based on strong fundamentals. It's not like these companies just took a bunch of leverage and levered up their balance sheets. Not at all. There's still, very healthy companies that are still growing. So I just essentially I look at my options when I'm in the country. And then there are places like Serbia. I like the story. I like the growth story that Serbia has. But it's actually hard to play because you go there, real estate is actually expensive. The local stock market is very illiquid. There's barely anything trading there. Sometimes they trade like $20,000-$30,000 a day. So for the whole stock market. So, it's how do you play it? And I don't know. Some markets are just very hard to play.
Is there a way that you always follow a method that when you go to a new country, where to start, where to evaluate? I mean, as a foreigner, you landed in a foreign country, how would you know where to check the real estate market? There's a language barrier. How would you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That's a good question. So typically I just walk around a lot to check out real estate. I check online, I go speak to real estate agents, and then I go speak to local lawyers to, make them talk about the process, how to buy. Often all these people have pretty good insight when you speak to a few different people. Sometimes I go approach as well brokers for local stock markets. I make them essentially pitch what they have to pitch, and I listen to what they have to say.
Yeah. Okay.
So it takes
Interesting.
time. It's not efficient. It takes a lot of time to do all of this research. But that's where there's delta often between perception that people have of a place and what is actually happening on the ground. And by spending time in these countries, I'm able to make money this way by exploiting the market inefficiencies. Because in Western countries, there are very few inefficiencies in the markets. They're very efficient. Everyone has the information, everything's very liquid, et cetera, et cetera. So it's harder as a retail investor to have an edge. But in those countries, when you have cash and you spend time on the ground, you can find these opportunities. And often, in many cases, risk can be actually a lot lower than what people think.
Yeah, when you actually know more about this investment, the actual risk is way less than the perceived risk without having any information about it, right? And
Yeah.
especially you are on ground in the market. So I wonder, how long have you been doing this?
It's been like 4 or 5 years now. And then I started a blog about it because people were always asking me, hey, Ladislas, they see my picture on Facebook in all of these countries. They're like, what do you do? Why are you always in these weird countries? Like, you don't seem to have a job. So I started blogging about it for fun. And then the blog turned into a little part-time business where I help people look at opportunities in emerging markets for investments and also for immigration.
Uh-huh. And now you have this YouTube channel also. I like it because people actually can see through your lens. They can see the building, they can see the street, they can see the country. And so for 4 or 5 years, do you have a home base or you're always on the road?
I have residencies in multiple countries, and I essentially I travel full time.
Okay. And then how do you deal with the current situation during COVID? Is there any restrictions for you or
I
not?
just don't go to places that won't let me in. So I haven't been going to Asia a lot.
That's a good point. I haven't been there for more than 2 years. So another question, if you can choose not to answer me, but it's a little bit, like straightforward. People might ask, if you want to sustain this kind of lifestyle, just manage your own money, travel to different countries, you have to pay for hotel, pay for accommodation, pay for air tickets, right? How would you go around with it? Like, how would you have sufficient cash flow to support your activities?
Well, from my investments, I receive dividends, I receive rental income, and capital gains because often, not all of them, but often my investments do quite well, so I make my money this way.
Okay, for someone new to this field and they have no idea how the cash flow thing, can support their daily expenses, can you explain us what are the ways can people get cash flows without they need to go to the office like 5 days a week to earn salary?
Yeah, and before we get to this question, life is a lot more affordable in these countries as well. when I'm in Turkey, I can get a decent Airbnb for, I don't know, $35 a night. So that's what, when I go to the Balkans, Latin America, etc., it's not very expensive. So instead of paying a rent, I just stay in Airbnbs, and it's probably less than what your audience is paying in Germany and Holland and the US. So I actually spend less than your audience wherever they are in Western countries, because I just don't spend time in high cost environments. So to get to the cash flow, yeah, a few ways to get cash flow. Yeah, invest in businesses that give you cash flow. So companies that give good dividends. I mean, there are companies out there giving fantastic dividends. There's this blogger that I follow who's really good, undervaluedshares.com, and he put out a report on Petrobras, so the big Brazilian oil company, and they're projected to give dividends of about 15-20% a year. So that's quite attractive, so you just invest a bit in that, and then you get decent income.
I don't even
Not
know that
investment advice.
I don't even know that exists, like 15-20% dividends per year.
Yeah. Then yeah, rental income, and then also starting little side businesses. So, I invested, for example, in that chicken and egg distribution in Gambia. It should, like, the cash flow looks very good. And then also starting some sort of online business. So this blog that I created with a YouTube channel. So that's also helping me on a daily basis.
What are the countries that you invest in real estate for, like rental income?
For rental income, right now the best is Ukraine. I'm most likely going to make probably a significant investment in Ukraine in the coming month or two. So I work with this Canadian fund manager. He is planning on buying an old flour mill in the city center and then turn it into an office building. So he's paying like $1,000 a square meter for a like very structurally sound building with a ton of parking space in the center of Kyiv. And then he'll put about $600 per square meter of renovations, add 2 floors, and then flip it in 2.5, 3 years. So that should be, I'm expecting about 150 to 200% return in 2.5, 3 years. But this is in the midst of media going around and saying, there's war, there's going to be war, Russia's going to invade, this, that. And when you actually look at the market in Kyiv, whether, like, if nothing happens, whatever, things continue and the investment will probably do well. If Russia does take parts of Ukraine, it'll probably only be parts in the east, but it doesn't hinder the fundamental thesis that is about supply. There's just not enough supply of office buildings in Ukraine. So in the rest of the world, when I tell people I'm going to make an investment in an office building in Ukraine, they think I'm absolutely insane, because one, war with Russia, and two, offices are dead because people work from home. But there is just not enough supply of offices in the first place in Ukraine. So like the vacancy rates are extremely low. Whenever you have an office, a tenant that leaves within a week or two, you have another tenant. There's just not enough supply. So you can have a whole bunch of stuff that hit demand, but it's not going to hit demand enough to solve the supply issue. So that's probably one of the next investments I'll be making, but it won't be giving me cash flow. So that'll be a capital gains one. But in terms of cash flow, yeah, like, again, Ukraine is a good one. I'm also evaluating, I spent time in Colombia, in Medellin, has some very interesting yields as well if you target the midterm market. So it's a bit of a niche. So you buy an apartment and you rent out for like 1 to 3 months to typically American and Canadian and some European digital nomads that want to spend time in Colombia. So because if you rent out apartments on the long-term market in Medellin, you get very low rental yields, like 3-4% gross. So it's not worth taking Colombia risk for these sorts of returns. But if you play your cards right, you can get 10%. gross by targeting that market. So that would be an interesting option as well.
Well, that's very informational. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Actually, the last few questions I want to ask actually is about you, because I want to, since when did you get started into this investing, wandering around across different markets? And you said you worked in a big corporate for 7 years. So how did this transition happen?
Yeah, I mean, because when I was working in corporate, I was investing a bit, but when I look back, many of my investments were suboptimal. Because I was working 60 hours a week, I just did not have the time nor the inclination, because I'd come back home and I'd be tired, to manage my own money. So it's only when I actually left my job that I was able to boost my returns, really, because I'm fully dedicated to it. So this transition, like I said earlier, just happened organically. It wasn't really part of the plan. It just happened.
Okay. And then
once you're doing something and you're enjoying it, you're traveling and you're making money, why would you go get a job?
Yeah, it's impossible to go back, right? This side is much better. And my last question, short answer: what does money mean to you?
Freedom.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't really care about money per se. I like freedom. And all money is to me is a means to freedom and to sleep well at night and to do what I want to do and to not be dependent on anyone or any government.
Yeah, we always say money actually is the tool. Money is not the goal. It's a tool for you to live a lifestyle that you want to live, right?
100%.
So if the audience want to learn more about investment in different countries, they want to follow you, where can they find you online?
So I have this blog called The Wandering Investor. So I really encourage people to sign up to the private list. It's entirely free, so it's a mailing list. And as I travel around the world, I send essentially my notes from the ground to people in terms of opportunities that I see. So really the mailing list is the best. And then I'm also on YouTube, Instagram, and you can find me The Wandering Investor.
All right. Thank you so much, Ladislas. And I hope to see you soon, sometime in Switzerland when you come back.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Fast Track Podcast. Show me your support by liking this episode and sharing it with a friend. Join the Facebook group at Fast Track Podcast 1, or you can find us on Instagram, YouTube, and of course the homepage fasttrack.life. See you in the next episode.